All right.
Hang on.
Maybe.
Go for it.
Are we live? Okay. I'm Chad Edgington, pastor of First Baptist Church Olney. Welcome to our, this is our special part 2 of the sermon. And I've enlisted a friend of mine. I've actually known Dr. Chris Hughes for, how many years would you say we've known each other?
At least since 7th grade, maybe.
I would say way earlier than that.
Way earlier than that, I can't remember.
I think, when did you move to Euless? 2nd grade?
I was kind of always in Euless.
Yeah.
That's why it's hard for me to.
When did you start coming to First Baptist Church Euless?
When I was 5,
Okay, so we've probably known each other since we were 5 years old
but
in Sunday school.
yeah,
But we've been good
We
friends
became
through
good friends
junior
starting
high
in
and high
junior high.
school, and yeah.
Mhm.
So Chris went to a different elementary school. So, enough of our personal history there. Anyway, Chris, one thing I'd say about Chris that I mentioned this morning, if you were at our sermon, is Chris has really studied Daniel chapter 9 for years and years and years, and has actually written a paper. Dale, you want to put the slide up there for the paper? Chris has written a paper on the actual topic that I discussed this morning in our Sunday sermon. And the title of the paper is The Terminus ad Quem of Daniel's 69th Week, a Novel Solution. So Chris has kind of come up with a new way of looking at this and went about submitting this paper to the Journal of Dispensational Theology, which is published by what institution? Dallas Theological Seminary? Or
no.
Okay.
Theirs is called Bibliotheca Sacra.
Okay. So Bibliotheca Sacra. I don't.
It's
know.
not.
I'm not like
I'm
really
not
good buddies
sure.
with those guys, but anyway. So Chris submitted, but it's a journal based on ideas in dispensational theology thought, and Chris submitted to them and had it published in about 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Yeah, 2013.
So let's talk about this. When I see this slide up here, by the way, let me give you background on Chris. Besides, lucking out and getting to go to a church with me growing up, we also, incidentally, trivia time, we also wound up going to church with Chip Gaines. So we knew Chip before he was famous on Fixer Upper, and Chip's always just been a really nice guy. I don't know. Do you remember from high school?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So anyway,
I didn't make the connection until you told me
yeah,
not that long ago.
it was crazy.
He's
Well,
on Fixer
I was
Upper.
watching the show, and and they kept saying Chip Gaines, and I was like, that's Chip Gaines. So it's kind of a weird, interesting moment there. But anyway, Chris is a doctor. He practices medicine up in the Metroplex area, and it's more of a family. Would you say family practice is the way you describe
Internal
that?
medicine.
Internal medicine.
Mhm.
Not topical. It's all. I don't really know. I don't know what any of that stuff means. So anyway, Chris is a medical doctor, so he's, that's what he does for his vocation. But Chris loves the Lord and has always been a very intense student of the Bible. And so, Chris, tell us, whenever you were whenever you were studying this, you kind of explained to me that kind of concerns or doubts is what led you to really look into this issue of Daniel's 69 weeks. So what kind of led you to that?
Well, like you said, I was always kind of interested in it from way back. And so I did this thing called, we did kind of inductive Bible study really got into it in high school. And the first book I studied was Daniel. And so I just kind of researched it, went through the text book and study materials I was given at the time. And I got I still hold this general view, but I got the real dispensational approach to it. And, dispensationalism tries to define periods of time in which God's doing certain things and show how it I wouldn't say changes, but it's different in certain time frames and other historically as salvation history is working itself out.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of adopted at face value what I was taught. Didn't really look into it deeper than what the things I read from other people. But time goes on, and I'm always thinking about this, coming back to it, always interested in prophecy in general. And a lot of prophecy goes back to understanding Daniel better. So I'd go back to Daniel, try to understand it better than I did before. My kind of spiritual gift is teaching. I had a class, Sunday school class at First Baptist Euless, and In teaching that, I got to Daniel, and I
Mm-hmm.
got to this part of Daniel, and I'm like, I'm ready to teach this now. I'm excited about it because
when
I
you-
do think Daniel 9.
And when you teach something, you really dig in because
Yeah.
then you don't just
I'm
accept it.
responsible.
You're responsible.
I'm responsible for what these people are hearing, and I want to be able to really explain, understand it myself first. So, and I think this chapter is the most important chapter in the Bible.
Okay, that's a big statement.
Yeah.
So justify it real quick. So why? Give me reasons why this would be the most important chapter in the Bible. And by the way, is our audio and everything working, Dale? We're good. We're on. Okay.
So the gospel is there. It predicts the coming of Christ. It predicts a ton of history in a bottle. It's not showing you everything, but it's given a big outline. And the context is important. It's in response to Daniel
Prayer.
knowing Scripture and praying Scripture back to God,
Yes.
and God honoring that and revealing to him an amazing prophecy about the coming of Christ. That in my paper, I say, if we could all just agree on kind of what I'm about to show, it's a smoking gun. But I say we don't have a smoking gun yet because we don't all agree yet, even within Christendom. And that's what I'm trying to just help clear things up, maybe get more people on board with how I'm going to show this thing works itself out, which will then create a better smoking gun for us,
But yeah. So you're saying it's a more convincing proof of the veracity of the claims of Christians that we make about who Jesus is.
Right.
So we're saying Jesus is the Messiah.
Right.
And so your thesis is that if you look at Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 69, when you look at this from
Daniel chapter 9.
Daniel chapter 9, when it starts, so the prophecy is let's go ahead and take a look at the prophecy and get started on that way in the second slide. It actually contains the prophecy, right?
The next slide,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so go ahead and tell us what the prophecy is.
Just to round out what I was saying before, I will, as I studied this again for my class, I noticed some slight mistakes made. They're just mistakes. The overall evangelical point of view, dispensational point of view is correct. There's just a few mistakes made in the presentation of the material. The first time this even came about that I know of, putting down in writing at least, was by Sir Robert Anderson in the late 1800s. And people kind of adopted that for a long time. And then another guy came along, Harold Honer, in the 1970s, right about the time I was born in 75, and published a paper and a book that went into more depth on this and kind of corrected a mistake that Sir Robert Anderson made.
Okay, so what are we actually? So I'm going to be like I'm going to pretend I don't know anything about what you're talking about, which is hard to do. Because I think sometimes when we talk about this, even when I was preaching it this morning, we go right over people's heads.
I know.
So what is the heart of what you're saying here? What is the heart of what was Honer trying to figure out and Anderson trying to figure out?
This prophecy is not easy, but once you see it, it is. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I agree.
And so you have to do a little work to get to the answer. But once the answer's there, it's obvious, like it was there all along, in plain sight. That's why prophecy often works. So Robert Anderson came up with a method of interpreting this that is valid. And Harold Honer modified it to correct for an error just in the start date of this prophecy, which we're going to get to.
So we're trying to figure out.
When it started and when it ends.
So the prophecy is talking about this prophecy is interesting because it's talking about a definite period of time.
Right.
Okay, and so if you've got a definite period of time from a certain event, which is the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, to the Messiah being cut off, which we'll talk about what that means later, that the Bible's predicting it's going to be this long.
Right.
Which is 483 years as we calculated.
We will show that.
Okay, so if it's saying that here when this happens, you can count from when the decree to build Jerusalem is given, you can count 483 years, and you will arrive at the Messiah being cut off.
Yes.
And so we're trying to figure out when does it start, and when does it end.
Right.
And basically, the big question is really more when does it end.
And don't skip over the most obvious thing. The Messiah is cut off, which means dead, and then we know he raised from the dead. It doesn't give you all that.
Yeah.
And that's where the crux of the argument here I'm going to get to. But it talks about Messiah being crucified or killed.
Killed, yeah.
A Messiah coming, number one, and being killed, number two, and when he's going to do it. It's
Yeah.
all there. in
And
this
it
thing.
predicts it all.
But it doesn't just say right out, because you got to have faith, and you got to be able to look at this. And to those who have ears here, to those who seek, they will find. That's what I've done. That's what you're doing if you're watching this video. If you're going to listen and be careful and go through this with me, you're going to find. You just have to respond to it. You have to actually believe it.
Yeah.
There's belief here. Smoking gun doesn't mean it's easy.
And as I mentioned in the sermon, and even if someone comes back from the dead, people are not convinced.
That's right.
So it's also a spiritual issue. It's here for what I say is the sheep hear the shepherd. So it's here if you have ears to hear it.
Right.
If you don't, it just is like, oh, that's
Still gonna
not-
go over your head.
It goes right over your head. So really,
But if you care, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And I like putting it on YouTube because you can rewind it if you miss something. And feel free also to type a comment on YouTube. I'll try to answer it when I have time.
So
I want
if
to
you
go
have
interact with
questions,
this too.
check the com boxes, and Chris can reply to that. So go ahead and read us the prophecy.
Okay,
Chris.
so let's go through the prophecy. There's a slide up. So I'm going to, this is the first part of it. We're in Daniel 9:24. So 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. That is a ton of things going on in 70 quote-unquote weeks. One of the translations says sevens, and that's actually a little better.
Yeah.
But I know most translations still say weeks, and so you're going to need, I have it written here, this is New American Standard. Remember, we're reading English, and this stuff's written in Hebrew. Actually, Aramaic. Here. That's a different topic for another day, why it's in Aramaic, but it's in Aramaic, and so we have to get at the meaning of those words. And so that 70 just says sevens. It's cryptic, but not, and I'll show that as we go, but intentionally so. The next part of this is, so you are to know and discern. So now it talked about 70 weeks, and now it's going to tell you. So remember, Daniel's getting this in about 538 BC, very close. Daniel's calculated it out. He said, man, I got taken into captivity in 605 BC. This is why Daniel 9, 1 through 19 is so important. Because Daniel looks at where he is in time and says, I read Jeremiah, and I know the Bible. I know Jeremiah, he was really close to that part of the Bible, but it still predated him, or it was still written not by him, and he knew it. And he's like, Jeremiah received a prophecy from God that said 70 years of captivity. And I know if I got taken in what we call 605 BC, he knows when he got taken. He knows how old he was then. He knows how old he is now. Yeah. I'm about a year or two out from when the 70 years is up. Remember, there was 3 stages of captivity. And so Daniel's hoping that God starts from the stage 1,
He's hoping 605 is the year,
not
586. Yeah.
when the temple was destroyed. Yeah. Don't count from there, please. Count from when I got taken. And so he's praying. So, God's listening to this. Maybe Daniel's prayer, may cause to God. I don't know where man's prayer influences what God.
It's a mystery, but we know it does,
okay,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to step into but prayer is important, right? We know that much. And so this has as much to do with anything else. And so his prayer, he gets this response. And the response is the 70 weeks. It's just another 70, right? They were in captivity for 70 years. A specific time. It was actually 70 years. 70. That's how long it lasted. 70 weeks, that's like a specific period of time. It's not just like open-ended 70 times 7 type thing. It's
so you're
specific.
saying there was a specific 70 given.
Yeah.
And now here's another specific 70 given.
Right.
So when I was
No
I was
surprise.
saying this morning, when I was saying it's vague, it's intended to be vague,
Right.
you would come back and say, this is coming on the heels of a 70.
Right.
And it's another 70.
Why else?
So, yeah.
Why wouldn't he interpret it literally?
Yeah, yeah. So, and some people do. Some people say this 70 weeks, which we're going to say a week is 7 years.
We're going to say
70 periods of 7 years.
I'll show you why.
Okay.
We're going to get to it.
And some would say that doesn't mean anything, but but the argument you're making that you feel like you can make from Scripture is that it's coming off of he's just realized the literal 70 is up.
Yeah.
And now he's about to give him another 70.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be 70 periods of 7 years.
Right.
But you're saying so there's in the context you would receive this as a literal period of time, just like the other 70
Why
was.
wouldn't he take it
I've
that
never
way?
heard the argument, but that's good.
That's how we just get, maybe we're talking about something literal here. Something that's, why even say 70?
Yeah.
Why even make it? And why talk about a specific point in time when it starts and a specific point in time when it stops, if it didn't matter? So, or the next verse here. So you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, at some point after 538, when Daniel's getting this prophecy from Gabriel, you are to know and discern that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, until Messiah the Prince, the anointed one, the Messiah, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So 7 plus 62, 69. Jerusalem will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after, it mentions 62 weeks, so I put in parentheses there, 7 weeks and, because it ended with 62. So it's saying that last 62 on top of that 7. There's a reason that's just those two periods of time are split. That's not worth our time right now. Just keep it at, there's 69 total. So after the 7 and 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Now, just to hone in on that part. The Messiah's cut off, has nothing. That's his, we know now, looking back, that's his crucifixion. I would argue then his resurrection and his ascension. And then the people of the prince come in. The people of the prince must be the Romans. The prince who is to come is in the next verse, which we'll get to. That prince who hadn't come, even by this point when the Messiah is cut off, it's the prince that hasn't come yet. Mm-hmm. His people, which are the Romans, destroy the city and the sanctuary. In 70 AD, that happened. That's when Titus the Roman destroyed and razed Jerusalem to the ground, a well-known phenomenon. From there, this diaspora happened. All the Jews got scattered to all the nations. That's why there's Ashkenazi Jews in Europe, that kind of thing. And so this prince, this people of the prince who's to come destroy the city and sanctuary, its end will come with a flood. Even to the end, there'll be war. Desolations are determined. Next slide. Oh, yeah, that's where I'm going to kind of stop right there.
Well, we've got some of those issues.
It's kind of popping on, but we got through it. We got through that part. I want to show this slide. This shows kind of where we are and puts what I'm going to fill this slide in as we go. So it says, here at the beginning, Daniel's getting the prophecy in 538 BC. At some point in the future, we haven't determined when yet, so I got a question mark. There's a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Then there's a 7-week period, a 62-week period. Then Messiah is cut off. And in 70 AD, on the timeline,
The destruction.
You have the destruction of the temple. That was the city and the temple, which was just talked about at the end of that prophecy. And then there's a gap of time, which we call the church age, thus dispensationalism. There's no doubt about it. The church wasn't seen in prophecy until now.
Now, go into that. You mentioned the D word. So let's say someone's not a dispensationalist. You're not necessarily just arguing for that this fits totally into a dispensational way of viewing things. This is just you're saying what the Bible teaches.
Dispensationalism is like a systematic theology of salvation history. Mm-hmm. But more than one theology shares this idea of different times that God's working different ways. I mean,
Right.
It just is what it is. So
Right.
I'm not really going into the dispensational whole theological construct.
Uh-huh.
That's not, but they do like this.
Yeah.
And so,
This
but
fits
a lot
in
of
well
people
with that theology
Yeah.
to say that the reason that there's a break between the 69th week and the 70th week
is because
the
God's doing
church
something
has to come in.
that's mysterious.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you that in a second. But first, this little slide, this is telescoping. So anytime you read, because we just got through the 69 weeks, right? I didn't even I said there were 70, right? But I only went through 67 and 62. That's 69. So there's this 70th where this prince who is to come, who hadn't come yet, does some bad things. Mm-hmm. That hadn't happened even yet because it involves the wrapping up of the 70 weeks as a whole. Remember, it said the end of sin, everlasting righteousness. I mean, we still sin. We don't have everlasting righteousness in the full. We have it in our hearts, but we're trying to
So we're
see it
saying
for
that
reality.
this could mean, yes, it could apply, that prince to come could apply to Titus, but it also could apply to, there's another horizon. in
Titus is just the
prophecy.
people of the prince who is to come.
Yeah.
That specifically said the people of the prince.
Okay.
The Romans. Now, a lot of prophetic teachers, myself included,
I said the
think
Antichrist.
of the Antichrist as part of the revived Roman Empire.
I said that
Thus the
today in my
Romans.
sermon. I didn't say the revived Roman Empire, but I did mention that's the Antichrist.
Yeah.
But you're saying that part of the prophecy can be fulfilled in the first century, and then part of it's yet to come.
Right, because you have this gap of the church age
Okay.
that just changed everything up. And so the prophets always telescoped. What do you do when you look at a telescope? You're looking through space, and there's all this stuff in between you're not seeing. That picture I've shown right there is a bunch of galaxies. Those galaxies can be separated by billions of miles, light years. They can be separated, but they look like they're all flat together when I'm just looking at it.
They look like they're right next to each other,
Right.
and there's no way that they are.
Right. And even the picture to that point has looked past all this other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And so that's what the prophets got to see, mountain peaks, I think you described it that way. There's a valley of time they're not seeing,
They don't see the valley.
and God hid it from them on purpose.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you that. Paul said it 3 times that God hid the church from them. It's the valley. And the peak is the Messiah's first coming and his second coming. And Old Testament prophecy always smashes those two together as one event.
Yeah.
Christ read from Isaiah 61, I believe, when he started his ministry, and stopped right before it says, and the wrath. And it starts talking about the wrath and the terrible day of the Lord. Christ stopped with that and said,
yeah.
I'm coming to bring, freedom and
Like when Joel writes about the day of the Lord, they
Yeah,
see it
exactly.
off on the horizon, and they just see Christ, but they don't see Christ coming 2,000 years ago, and Christ coming again, whether it's now or 10,000 years from now, whatever it is. They don't see the space in between, just because the way I describe it is, it's like when you look at the mountain range, like Chris was saying, you just see the mountains, and that's kind of they just saw Christ.
right.
They didn't see necessarily all the details of, so what I think, just to back up in case someone's
Yeah,
gotten
I'm
lost
going
on it.
crazy.
So what we're saying is that when the 69th week stopped, there's going to be there's a period of time until the 70th week starts.
We haven't even reached
Yeah,
it yet.
yeah, we haven't reached it. Even
So-
though you can say as I said this morning in my sermon, some parts of this have been fulfilled and some parts haven't.
Right. So to review, the 69 week stops at the Messiah's being cut off. The 70th, which is here, hasn't started yet. Let's just clear that up.
Yeah,
Chad can fix that.
I can fix this thing. You'd think that I would have been able to fix it.
You just, there you should be looking cleaner now.
We good?
Yeah,
All right.
it's our program. But
Yeah.
he will make a firm covenant with the many. Who's the he? The last person mentioned, which was the prince who was to come, who's now coming here in verse 27. He will make a firm covenant with the many. The many is always Israel, always in the Old Testament. The many ain't seeing, the Old Testament is not seeing the church. So it's seeing the many, which is Israel. He makes a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. That's 1 7-year period. If you ever get confused, just think that 70th week is 7 years. That's the tribulation. That's 7. Because it says sevens, 1 7.
Yeah.
Let's make it instead of days, let's make them years. So instead of a week of days, a week of years. But in the middle of the week, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. Now, if you ever read Matthew 24, Jesus talks about this as a future event to him. And he's interpreting it. He's saying, man, when I leave, because he didn't know the day of hour, his own return either. Guys, when you see this happen, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, run to the hills because it's going to get bad. And so on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, even until a complete destruction, one that is decreed, this is going to happen, is poured out on the one who makes desolate. And Paul talks about that, how the Antichrist, when he comes, will be destroyed by the word of his mouth when Christ comes back. That's what he's talking about. Poured out on the one who makes desolate. That's the destruction of the Antichrist by the Messiah himself. Can't get into all that today, but here's the 70th week. So we know it's a 7-year period. It's got a middle because it said, when I go back, that's going to happen. But
Is that what you- yeah.
yeah.
Just remove the background.
It's got a-
We can
it's got
fix
a-
that easily.
okay.
We put PowerPoint slides into ProPresenter, and we're trying to get them on here for you. So if it looks funky for a minute, I'll fix it.
Okay.
So
All right. So anyway, he's making his firm covenant in the middle of the week. I don't want to skip over that part. In the middle, he'll put a stop to sacrifice and grain offering. It gets worse when that happens. And after that, Christ said, you'll see a great tribulation like none has ever seen. So we call this period after he sets up this abomination of desolation in the middle of this week, the great tribulation. That's the last 3.5 years. So that's what I have on that slide there. In the midst of the week in Daniel 9:27, it divides that week into a half. That's the period of time that hadn't happened yet. I know you guys really want to talk. Everybody loves to talk about the end times. That's about all I'm about to say. All I'm going to say about it today. We got to get the.
Even after church, people are asking you about the end times.
I was like,
Yeah, that's great, though. It's just one of those fascinating
I'm not
things.
ignoring it. That's not the subject matter today. Bring me back. We'll talk about the end times. All right. Clean that up.
There we go.
All right. This is to prove to you that the prophets did not see the church. I like to make sure Scripture backs up what I'm saying. And if it's repeated 3 times, it must really mean it must really mean it. So real quick, I'm not going to read every sentence here, but Ephesians 3:3-6, Colossians 1:25-27, and even Romans 16:25-26, Paul repeats the same concept, which is, look at Ephesians 3. In other generations was not made known this mystery of Christ, which in other generations was not made known to the sons of men, has now been revealed to his holy apostles and prophets in the Spirit, which is Paul's day. To be specific, what is this mystery? That the Gentiles are fellow heirs and fellow members of the body. The Gentiles are what defines the church, because in Romans 11 it says, Israel rejected, thus the gospel went to the Gentiles. So this church age is defined by the Gentiles receiving the gospel.
Right.
Once the Gentiles fulfill, the fullness of the Gentiles comes in, I'm quoting Romans 11. Once the fullness comes in, then it goes back to Israel, and all Israel will be saved. That's an end-time event spoken of in the prophets like crazy. When you read the new covenant in the Old Testament in the light of the Jews coming to know Christ, because that's the original context, they didn't see the church. Now, by grace, it applies to the church. A total gracious act, undeserved, out of the blue, a total mystery. That's why Paul calls it a mystery. The prophets did not see it. You cannot read the church in the Old Testament because they didn't see it, because he says they didn't. He repeats it again. Of this church I was made a minister, so I might fully carry out the preaching of God's word. That is, the mystery, hidden from past ages and generations, including Daniel, but has now been made manifest, to whom God willed to make known the riches of his glory, the mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory, the fact that the gospel went to the Gentiles. He repeats it again in Romans 16. And so you have this gap of time when the Gentiles get the gospel that is not seen by the Old Testament prophets. And that is a designed element there.
So for Daniel,
you would expect a gap to be there.
So for Daniel's, and it stops after the 69th week.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying we've got Daniel's prophecy from the beginning point, decree to rebuild Jerusalem, 69 weeks, Christ is cut off, then there's a gap, and then the 70th week will start at some point in the future. Okay, so that's where we are now.
All right. This is just a quick slide. Not everybody agrees with me. I'm going to move on. We don't have time. Now, who is this anointed one? I only bring this up because some people say, how do Jews interpret this that aren't believers? How could they not see the Messiah? It says the Messiah in Daniel 9. Why don't they see it as him being cut off? Mainly because they've in the blindness that they have right now, don't want to admit that it's the Messiah, though it's obviously that's what it's talking about. They attach it to the events of the Maccabees rebellion. So that's
not so much they don't want to admit it. They just don't see it.
Yeah, but
it's clear.
They don't see it. They're blind.
Yeah, they're blind. They're blinded.
And it's just, I'm just saying what Scripture says. I love the Jewish people, and the main goal of the gospel is to get it back to the Jews, to the Jew first and to Gentiles. It says, once the gospel goes to the entire world, all the Gentiles, then the end will come. And with the end coming comes the salvation of the Jews as a whole. So we need the end to come. And that comes through spreading the gospel.
And Paul says that so much. Paul says that in Romans too, about if we grafted in and we're the wild branches, it'd be easier to graft in the natural branches.
Yeah.
And he wants it so bad he's willing to go to hell if they could come in.
Right.
So
it's not to call them out. It's just is the way it is.
Yeah.
Some things just are the way they are. So they'll attach it to, at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, there was a high priest called Onias. And so they say he's the anointed one. He's the one that got cut off. That's when the prophecy's fulfilled and over and done with. It's all the Antiochus Epiphanes events. And write it off.
And all that happened in the middle between the Old Testament and New Testament being written.
100, 200 years before
Christ
Jesus.
coming, yeah.
That's all I'm going to really treat that. But that's kind of answer that question. Why don't they see it? Okay, terminus ad quo. That's just a fancy way to say the beginning. And people who study this prophecy
That's the
attaches to
term
that.
of art that they use.
So I got to use the term too to make any kind of sense out of what we're doing. So there's a different idea. Here's where I'm trying to get that smoking gun, but there's a lot of divergent ideas on it. There's about 7 ideas for when it starts, the beginning of this prophecy.
So we're talking about the 483 years that the 69 weeks make up.
Where did it
When
start?
does that begin?
Right. It didn't begin when Daniel got it. It says when a decree is made to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So there's a decree given by Cyrus to go back to Jerusalem. That's when the 70 years, I may screw up because this stuff gets kind of overlapping terms, but so the 70 years ended. Cyrus comes in and lets them all go back to home. Some of them didn't. I think a lot of people just stayed there.
Well, his actual decree, I think it's in the end of First or Second Chronicles, let him go up if he wants to.
Yeah.
It was just sort of like, you can go back if you want to.
Yeah. They were there 70 years. Most of them, the old ones are dead. I mean, these people didn't live in their 70s at that point. And the young ones, a lot of them didn't want to move, but a lot of them did because they had that fire in their heart. I want to go back to the Holy Land, my homeland. So a lot of them did go back, but it was
But that was not
barren place.
That was not a decree to build Jerusalem.
No, that was just to get back and like start making the land fertile again and get some kind of home going. It's not rebuilding anything for a long time. So there's really no building there. There's Artaxerxes comes along and gives a decree in 457 BC to go back, and they're started. So what happened is when they went back in 538, they, within a couple of years, started to build the temple. By 536, they started, and then they stopped. They got kind of distracted. They got kind of worried about too many other things, and temple wasn't a priority. Zechariah comes along towards the end of that period, around 520 BC. Remember, we're counting backwards in time because it's BC. So 538, 536, now we're back to 520. And he's like, guys, y'all got to get a lot of Zechariahs to get them motivated to rebuild the temple. And they're like, we need to build the walls first. And this is 520. Zechariah said, you're told to build the temple first because you're supposed to like put God first. Let him be the one that protects
Because your
you.
tendency is to want to rebuild the walls because you can trust in that. And he was saying, go rebuild the temple. Your trust should be in me,
Right.
not in your fortifications.
Right. Not in your own self.
So you're saying that the 457 decree by Artaxerxes.
We're not, well, that's just to give some context.
Mm-hmm.
Artaxerxes comes along later with Nehemiah and Ezra. And they built the temple by 516. They responded
Mm-hmm.
to Zechariah, got it finished. And by 516 BC, the temple's rebuilt.
Right.
Then later on in time, they need some furnishings of the temple. They need some civil leaders. They're starting to get like society back going, and that's what they need. And Artaxerxes lets them more go back and handle that kind of stuff. Remember, Artaxerxes, we're back in Persia, Babylon. The Persians took over so how Babylon took over from the
Assyrians.
right. So Babylon's ruling the show. Then the Persians come in and take over them.
Yeah.
So now Artaxerxes is a Persian,
Right.
and Cyrus was too. So you got Nehemiah and Ezra in the Persian Empire, obviously born to kids who stayed there, right? That's why I said not everybody left, went back home. And then they're trying to go back, and they're getting fire to go fix the temple, get it great. So that's Ezra. He's worried about that. And then Nehemiah's worried about fixing the walls and rebuilding the city.
And that's what the book focuses on, even who's going to live in the city. I mean, part of rebuilding the city is getting the population back.
Right.
None of them wanted to live there.
Right.
I think the best argument for 444 as being the beginning of the prophecy is that if there had been a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, it would have already been rebuilt.
Yeah. It wasn't rebuilt.
It wasn't rebuilt. That
was a
was the
mess.
problem. The reason Nehemiah was so upset
Yeah.
and he was crying about it and praying about it was because the city was in ruin. When his brothers came back and told him, he was heartbroken.
Yeah.
And so sitting and weeping over it because the city was destroyed, and it had been destroyed for a long time.
Right.
So that's the decree in 444 BC, when you're saying this is in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, that decree given to Nehemiah, that's when most people, at least would agree with that have done the studies on this, would say that's when it starts. That's when your 69 weeks starts.
Yes.
444 BC.
That's what I'm going to regard and show you here without getting too crazy. This is just this slides. You can read it. It's not that much important. So what I'm going to show here is, like Chav was already talking about, but I'm going to show it. But this is to get you ready for it. If 1 week is 7, and a week means sevens, if 1 sevens is 7 years instead of 7 days, that means 69 weeks is 483 years, and the full 70 would be 490. And so we're just talking about this dispensational point of view. That word week is Shabua. I just want to show you that word means sevens, period of 7.
It doesn't mean that it has to be days. It's
Right.
just sevens.
Right.
My Bible says 77s are decreed.
Yeah.
You know.
That's the translation you're using, which I like. I've already talked about this. I'm going to move on. This one is, why? First of all, why 70? Why were they in the? Why did they get put in captivity 70 years? Second Chronicles says, so the land could finally enjoy. I'm bringing this up for a reason, but so the land could finally enjoy its Sabbaths. Mm-hmm. So what was going on? Every 7th year, the people were supposed to not
till the land.
work the land. So when they were in their open idolatry for 430 years,
they weren't worried about that.
They weren't worried about that part. So the land never enjoyed its Sabbaths. But what does that imply? That Sabbath is a year. Mm-hmm. So there's already built-in weeks of years. And they call it even, a Sabbath is the last day of the week, right? Mm-hmm. They called a whole year a Sabbath because they had a period of 7 days that repeated and a period of 7 years that repeated. And both of them are sevens for that word.
So the idea of getting 7 years out of the 77s is not.
They already have a 7 year.
They have a week. They have weeks of days and they have weeks of years.
Yes.
And on that, and at the end of the week of years,
they call that a Sabbath.
At the end of the week of years, they weren't supposed to plow.
They rest the whole land for a whole year.
And they just are supposed to have stored up food.
Yeah. For 6 years, and anticipate it.
Yeah,
and rely on God for that.
And then they would just sort of sit around for that 1 year. What did the farmers do?
I don't know. I'm not. They probably had other things.
But it was actually
religious.
smart farming, right? Because if you wear the land out by continual.
I'm not a farmer, but maybe there's like precedent for that. Maybe they already do something. I don't know.
Oh well, they do that. They rotate fields.
Yeah.
They do that. So.
Okay.
Maybe they rested certain land in certain years, and
I don't think that was the concept. But that's what they were probably doing. How can we get around this?
Yeah, I'm always looking for the loophole.
Yeah, right. Anyway, so that adds up. I can show you how it adds up. 430 years. You'll do the math, and it's like 61. If you 430 years divided by 7 is like 61.
Okay.
But when you do it in their years, you can actually make it add up. It's about 70 Sabbath rest 70 years of land rest that they didn't do.
Yeah.
That's why 70 years of captivity.
So that was why they were gone.
That's the logic.
But you're saying that's the logic of why that particular time period.
Right.
But the reason is because of their sin and iniquity that they kept being warned. If you guys don't return and repent, you're going to be carried off to Babylon, and they were carried off for 70 years. And
built into that reason for their carrying off is a 7-year week.
Crazy, right?
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a 7-year week. We can just move on now. Other parts in Daniel, I want to bring this up. In Daniel 10:2, it says, I, Daniel, had been mourning for 3 entire weeks. Here, Daniel means sevens of days, because the word entire is the word yom. We don't even see that. Like other places in English, it says day. Here it says entire, but the same word is there, yom, which means day. Mm-hmm. So 3 days, 3 sevens of days. He defines it there. Mm-hmm. But in the previous chapter, he didn't define it. Mm-hmm. It just says sevens. Mm-hmm. If he meant sevens of days, he would have said, just like he did here, he would have said sevens of days. So he didn't say sevens of days. He meant this 7-year week, 7-year week. That's what he probably meant. There are other places in Daniel where there are obscure periods of time that actually mean years. So in Daniel 7, this has relevance to our current topic, because I am going to get back to the 70th week to some degree. So in Daniel 7:29, it says time, times, and half a time.
Yeah, 3.5 years.
So why? Well, why do you know? Why do you believe that time means year?
I don't know. I just know that it just has to. I don't think it means day. I think it's a year, 2 years, and a half a year.
I'm just giving you a hard time. But why do we think time? Why does the word time mean a year? Well, it's used also in Daniel 4, and it's talking about 7 times in which Nebuchadnezzar went mad. And everybody understands that's 7 years, but his hair...
Well, some people say it means 7 seasons, but no one says it means 7 days.
Right.
You know, it specifies a longer period.
It's a long period of time. How long would it take for a hair to grow like eagles? feathers and nails like birds' claws.
Yeah, it's gonna take a long time to grow your hair out.
Dew
like
of
that.
heaven.
Yeah.
There's seasonal change going on. And then the word times means, it's like the English for both. It's a dual in the Aramaic. It's not just many. It means actually two. So it's 1 time, 2 times, that's 3 total, and half a time, 3.5. And that's in Daniel 7:25. It's also in Revelation. Just so happens that Daniel 7:25 is talking about the same middle of the week in Daniel 9:27. And so that's a 7, again,
Yeah, the
7
middle-
years.
middle of the week,
Because
yeah.
we're talking about time as a year. That's 3.5 years. And built into Daniel 9 is a 3.5 year period in the middle of that week. So that's just more logic to get you to this, to kind of fall in line with what I'm saying. But it's legitimate, logical. Within the text of the Daniel itself, we're letting Bible interpret Bible, and we're starting with the book interpreting itself. So kind of leave it at that. So assuming 1 week equals 7 years, well, how long is a year?
That's the real question.
Yeah, right.
Because I knew when I started saying this, when I'm preaching this morning, I say 43 years, and I said 444. People are going to start doing the math
Yeah.
and see how it works
And
out.
it doesn't work.
Because we don't use the same calendar.
Right.
And there's a way that the prophetic calendar, or the way prophecy tends to count years.
Yes. I'll explain that right here. So we use the Gregorian system. And so that's like using like solar. We're trying to get as accurate as we can. We know, they didn't know then, but we know now, the earth goes around the sun. And one orbit around the sun is 1 year. It happens to be not just 365 days, but 365.2425 and a bunch of other decimals. And so the Gregorian gets to that decimal. It doesn't get all the way out. The Gregorian's pretty close. The previous calendar was the Julian, but even before the Julian was when Daniel was written. So they were using like a 30-day month. So that's the lot. They were on a lunar-based
The way the
calendar.
moon worked.
Yeah. But like the Muslims use a lunar-based calendar, and their month of Ramadan, which is their holy month, every year it moves a couple days or so. And so it'll go through all the seasons over the course of many, many years and get itself back around because they don't correct for the sun. But the Jews do. They would add an extra month instead of a leap year every 4 years, every 3 years they'd add an extra month called Vader. And that's actually where Harold Honer screwed up. He didn't take into account the month of Vader.
Oh, okay.
Because it was after a third year, gets thrown in there every 3 years to keep it.
You got to have an extra
Keep
30
the holy
days.
holidays from moving off the calendar in the
Right.
wrong time of year if you're just using lunar. So they had a 30-day month construct, though. So that's what you have to use, and I'll show you that here in a second. So that means we just got to get it to days because there's always 24 hours in a day, and then you can use that to calibrate the calendars. So there's a calibration event we're going to have to do. It's never quite as easy to like it to be, but we got to get it right. But an important point is never to anachronistically put your stuff into the Bible the way your culture does something,
The way you figure, the way you think of a calendar.
or the way you do anything,
Yeah.
even science, even in Genesis, even anywhere. You got to always be consistent and let the science of the day, let the calendar of the day, let the language of the day prevail in that text. And then you have a better window into what actually is being said and not draw crazy conclusions that get everybody off. So we kind of went over that, but we can use Revelation to really interpret this for us. So Revelation says, if you just compare Revelation 11, 12, and 14, 11, 12, and 13, it uses these terms interchangeably. 1,260 days, interchangeably with 42 months, with time, times, and half a time. And time, times, and half a time is direct reference to Daniel. We just went over that, so keep that in your mind.
Right.
That's the 3.5 years of the 70th week.
Right.
It's calling that 3.5 years 42 months. It's calling that 3.5 years 1,260 days. So it uses it interchangeably. So there's that slide just to kind of put it.
times, and a half time is 3.5 years, because it says it's
Revelation
1,260
really makes it
days
clear.
and 42 months,
Yeah.
so you're not talking about a week.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's making
You're
it
not
real
talking about a
clear
day of
for you.
weeks. Yeah, it's
And
real clear.
Revelation's there to interpret Scripture in the Old Testament. It's there as to
I
wake
get
you
you.
up.
I
Is what
get
it
you.
means. So, got to get that clear. All right.
Got it.
There's the math, just so you see it. 1260 divided by 42 is 30 days a month. Spaced out equally, consistent, 30 days. Forget about leap years, forget about anything.
So the
30 days a month.
like the way prophecies figure in these days, in biblical prophecy in Revelation, referring back to Daniel, tells us that the times, and half time is 1260 days.
Yes.
Okay, so if you divide that out, you get
It's got to be, if it's like that for for 3.5 years of the 70th week, it's like that
for the rest of the weeks.
rest of the 70th week, and it's like that for the rest of the 69 weeks.
Right. Okay.
Because the whole thing's
Gotcha.
consistent with itself.
So we're talking
All we need is a
360
a legend,
day,
right?
360 day years.
yes,
That's what we got.
360-day years. Yes.
Okay.
So for 7 years times 69 of those sevens is 173,880 days.
Okay.
There's always 24 hours in a day. That's how many days elapse, no matter what calendar you're using.
So
we
what's-
all use the same.
Here's the argument you're making.
Yeah.
Like I said, prophecy for dummies. The argument you're making is from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem
Uh-huh.
to Jesus being ultimately, you're going to say ascended, to the ascension of Jesus is 173,880 days.
Yes.
To the day.
To the day.
And that's the smoking gun.
Yes.
That's the thing where the prophecy says it's going to be this many days, and it works out to be that many
And
days.
if I'm going to do that math, I got to show you the exact year it starts and the exact year it ends. Or none of it works. And I'm not doing a good job. So I'm going to do a good job. We're going to figure it out. So we have learned something here. I can put in 173,880 days. I can stick that into our little timeline that I started.
Okay.
So this helps you kind of plug things in. As you go through it, you'll see it better at the end. And you can always look back through these slides.
Because it seems like we're talking about something really confusing because of the way you're figuring it. But the ultimate claim is from decree to rebuild Jerusalem to Messiah cut off, 173,800.
And what have I not answered? When
When-
did it
when-
start?
when
When
did
did
it
it
start?
end?
When's it end? Yeah.
I just got the middle part.
Right.
Now I got to figure out where it starts and ends. Why is it? Okay. I think that's, yeah, I already said that. Oh. Okay. And I was just showing there how Revelation unseals it. So now, we just said we're probably going to go with this decree given to Nehemiah. Let me prove you why we should do that just from the text of Nehemiah itself. Let me show you why it's 444 BC. Here's the thing. Sir Robert Anderson said it was 445 BC. He had it wrong. And I still see in books to this day by good Christian authors, they'll quote 445 because they're using what the previous guy said.
No.
And he's using what the previous guy said, who he's using Sir Robert Anderson.
So Robert Anderson was a guy who he just started trying to figure this out sometime in the 1890s.
Yeah,
he didn't have the internet.
Right.
They didn't have the star charts and so you've kind of got better tools. He was doing a pretty good
Yeah,
job.
I really respect him. He got us all on the right track. But we all help each other.
Right.
That's all this is. This is just helping the next guy.
Okay.
But people still quote that 445 BC number, and they reach 32 AD for the crucifixion of Christ, which is messed up. And I'll show you why. But Harold Hoehner comes along from DTS,
In the
Dallas
70s.
Theological, in the 70s, and fixes it to 444 BC, and I'm going to show you why.
Okay.
And so that fixes it to 33 AD when Christ was crucified. We'll get there in a second. But what are we talking about in Nehemiah? Well, compare this to what Daniel 9:25 says starts this thing. So in Nehemiah 2, it says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah asked the king to send him to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it. And what does Daniel 9:25 say? From the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. That's the decree. Nehemiah asked for it. The king writes it down and tells him to go.
Yeah, and then he gives them all the supplies to do it. We've been doing like a really
I'm
intense
glad
Bible study on
isn't that
Nehemiah.
amazing how you've already been doing
Yeah,
that?
and so when I mentioned it today, they're like, yeah,
Everybody's like, yeah.
yeah, we know what they were exactly what they were doing.
So God set you guys up for it.
Yeah, that's right.
And you see all this stuff that I'm getting screwed up here on my slides? That's Satan trying to stop this.
Chris is convinced that we can't make
So I know I'm
PowerPoint
on the right
work.
track.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for confirmation. We all have our doubts, right?
That's right.
Anyway, so I've kind of gone over this already. I don't want to. Y'all can just look at that slide. I don't want to belabor things too long either. Like I said, now what I'm going to do here, I just said we use the Gregorian calendar. But historians, astronomers, and everybody worth anything uses the Julian calendar. It's done so traditionally. And they also have a thing set up called Julian day numbers.
Okay.
And so they calibrate everything to the Julian calendar. So sometimes you may see a Gregorian date quoted, and it's like a couple days off. And that's because they're using the Gregorian. Really, when you're quoting a historical date, make this clear, use the Julian calendar.
Okay.
Always. That is the standard by historians, astronomers, legitimate people. That
And
is
so
the standard.
every day when they just start wherever we are, one day they started this and they just measured them all, they just numbered them all
Yeah.
backward or something
They,
like
they,
that.
they created, I'll show you that in a second.
Yeah.
I got a slide on that. But they picked a day like 4000 BC, and that's Julian day number 1.
Okay.
And so you got Julian day numbers on any given date in history.
Okay.
And all I got to do, now, like you said, so Robert Anderson didn't have the internet, and I do.
He didn't have
I have
the
an
day, he
unfair
didn't have the
advantage.
day numbers.
And I went and looked it all up. And there's a calendar converter, which I can show you. I have it in these slides. We'll get to it, where you can do it yourself as well. But always be using the Julian dating system. So I'm putting that in context here. What's the difference between Julian and Gregorian? Look at that slide, you'll see. But Julian kind of recognized there's a big problem, so they added leap years every 4 years. But Gregorian's this calendar recognizes this is the Pope, Gregory, something, the 13th or something. He recognized, hey, even if you're using the Julian, it's still a little bit off. So we got to get it more down to 365.25, 2425. And so how they do is like, let's see, year numbers are easily divisible by 100 are not leap years. So if you get to a year number like the year 2000, if that happened to fall on a leap year, they would not do a leap year. That gets it more accurate.
Okay.
But that's all they did. That's the only difference. But on the year 400, or if it's divisible by 400, it remains a leap year. They just established these rules.
Okay.
All right. It took many, many years.
And they're just trying to figure out
It took a while for people to adopt that
but they're just trying to figure out how do we
design.
really accurately measure
Yeah.
how long it takes the Earth to go around the sun.
without fully understanding what has even happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we still use the Gregorian calendar to this day.
But no matter how you figure it, there's a day and then there's a night and there's a day. So if you think about it in terms of days, which is why you broke it down to 173, 880.
You just calibrate.
just calibrate
and you
days.
ignore the whole leap years and all that.
years and all that.
That's where Harold Hohner and Sir Robert Anderson get into trouble. They start to try to reintroduce those ideas. Just don't do that.
Yeah.
There's no need to. So anyway, it says there that it was in the 20th year of Artaxerxes. That's what it says in Nehemiah. In the 20th year of Artaxerxes, in the month of Nisan, that's when Nehemiah was told to go back. And I'm going to show that that's 444 BC.
Okay.
So again, to reset, when was this decree given to start the 69 weeks? Really to start the 70 weeks? That decree was given in 444 BC, and it's in the Bible it says the 20th year of Artaxerxes. Here's the problem. That's not even simple, unfortunately. I'm making him yawn.
I'm just sleepy.
It's tough. So the Persians use a different system of reckoning years, the start of a year,
Okay.
than the Jews do. Persians use Nisan to Nisan. That's their year, no matter what. The Jews have 2 years. They have a civil year and a religious year. And their civil year starts in Tishri, and that's what they use to any king. If you're referencing a year of a king, you're going to use the Tishri to Tishri, according to the Jewish system. And we know Nehemiah was using the Jewish system. And I'll show you that in a second. If he's using the Jewish system, he's using Tishri to Tishri. Think of that as fall to fall.
Okay.
Nisan is spring to spring. He's using fall to fall. And so that gets you off a year. That's why Sir Robert Anderson says 445. He used the Persian by accident.
Okay.
And Harold Hohner proved that, showed it. And I'm just reproducing Harold Hohner stuff, but no, without a doubt, you need to use the Tishri to Tishri. That puts it in 444 BC. And this is just showing year 1. It was year 20 of Artaxerxes when that decree was given. We got to start in year 1. So year 1 we know because, clear that out again. Year 1, we show that, we know this because in December of 465, Artaxerxes' father, Xerxes, died, and he takes over. And he has an accession year. his new year, his year one doesn't start until that year's up.
Okay, yeah.
That's just what if you started everybody's years like the middle of the year? It'd be hard to keep
Right.
track of all your kings, right? So they would always call it the accession year when you took over from your dad. And then a few months, whenever that was, however many months later, you get to the actual your new year. And for the Persians, it was Nisan. So his accession year, according to the Persians, you'll see there the Persian system. His dad died. Look at that little asterisk I got in right before January. That was December of that year. His dad died. He takes over. So his accession year is the previous Nisan to the next Nisan. And then
So his first year doesn't start until 464.
until Nisan 1 of 464.
Right.
That's when his first year starts. According to the Jews, they would reckon it in their little books, Tishri to Tishri, so they wouldn't start his first year until Tishri 1 of 464. But that makes a difference at the end. But that's his accession year. There's his year one. I'm just showing you the slides. You can go back and look at them. I'm just teaching you how to interpret it. And then we know Nehemiah is using the Hebrew system because when you compare Nehemiah 1:1 to Nehemiah 2:1, it says, now it happened in the month of Kislev in the 20th year. That's December, our December. In Nehemiah 2:1, it says, and it came about in the month of Nisan in the 20th year. And that's the next event. So if you got the month of Kislev in the same year as the month of Nisan, you're using the Jewish system.
Okay.
Because the month of Nisan is the next year,
As
according to
opposed to the Persian system.
the Persians have the month of Nisan the next year.
Okay,
But if you call both of them the 20th year, then you're using the Jewish system.
okay.
So you got to use, that's going to screw up here. Okay, good. You got to use this, 465. So according to the Jews, his year one is starting Tishri 1 of 464. Don't worry about it. We're good. And his year 20 is starting Tishri 1 of 465. And Nisan of year 20 is 444 BC.
Okay.
And it didn't say what day in Nisan. It says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, the decree was given to go back
Okay.
and rebuild Jerusalem.
So go ahead and clarify one more time. What would be the difference if it's not using the Persian system? But
It's right there.
So
That's
you're
like-
saying the difference is like 6 months or something?
Yeah, it's 6 months.
Okay.
It makes all the difference, though,
Okay.
because they're reckoning it different. They got his
Because if
year.
it was going to the Persian system, the Nisan would have to be the year before in 465.
Right.
But because it's using the Hebrew
445.
445.
Not to be
But,
confusing.
but because it's
The year before, yes.
well, I'm saying the year that he became the king.
Yeah.
So in the 20th year, if you
Because it just so happens this is given in Nisan. That messes it all up, right? Because in Nisan, their new year is happening,
right?
but not for the Jews. Their new year isn't happening in Nisan.
Okay.
Their new civil year is happening in Tishri.
Okay. So it's still in Nisan in the 20th year, or it would have been another year. It would have been the next year.
It would have been, it would be their 445. It would have to be the previous Nisan.
But figuring the way
Yeah.
figuring that he's using the Hebrew system, it's 444.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as my slides are just showing that. If you go back and if you were to make a slide like that for every year, it would just go right to that spot. So that's just showing that the Jewish calendar is what's being used by Nehemiah. So we've got to say 444 BC is the 20th year of Artaxerxes.
Okay.
And that's when the decree's given
In
in
the
that
month of
Nisan.
Nisan,
Just any
444.
day of Nisan.
Okay.
Harold Honer just picks Nisan 1 because Sir Robert Anderson picked Nisan 1.
Yeah.
But it
And I've
didn't
read
say
somewhere
Nisan
where
1.
they said that if they didn't say anything, it's the first or whatever. But
That's just trying to make it work.
yeah.
That ain't, there's no reason to think that. So, move on here. We have to clean that slide up.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if it's something I've already shown. I've already just said that. That's just for reference. People want to read. They're probably confused.
Yeah.
They can pause the video.
Feel like I
there.
can read that.
Yeah, and this is just me showing the slides again, and reiterating everything I just said. Now we know the start date on our little picture here. 444 BC starts it. Now we're getting to the end of it. Now we can talk about when this whole thing ends, the 69th week.
So all of that
All
to
of that
say,
gets us started.
but you don't just want to say it because there's people that think different things. So
Yeah.
you're saying, hey, this is how I'm figuring this up.
Yeah.
But to say that when we were reading in First Baptist Olney, we call it FBCO University, when we were doing our study, that was a really important date whenever the decree was given, whatever day that was, when he went in there, and whenever the king actually said, okay, I'm writing this out, do this, go get the lumber here, do all this, that decree date to rebuild Jerusalem is the beginning of the 69 weeks.
Yes.
That's where we got so far. All
Yes.
right, take us home.
And we know it's 444 BC. All right, the end. Okay, it says he's cut off. That's when this 69 ends. Okay, what does that word cut off mean? We know from Leviticus it means execution by means of the death penalty. So the cut off does include Christ's crucifixion. It means to kill somebody. It also talks about in Proverbs 2:22 in Psalm 37:9 the eradication of that person from the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And in Genesis 9, it's destroying and killing in general. So we know it. This got to align in some way with it.
It's got to have something to do with the
Crucifixion.
crucifixion.
Yeah.
So from 444, and if you just go from 444 and you count the days, it does put you in the year right around the
It
time,
puts you in 33 AD.
but right around the time all this is happening.
Yes.
So if people are like, well, that's close enough for me,
That's good
they
enough.
don't they,
That's
they
fine.
may not want to totally get in the weeds on it,
They don't have to.
right? But and that's still amazing.
Yeah.
Even if you don't want to get into.
But
is
why
it the
wouldn't you want to get into the weeds?
Well, because we're not all you. I mean, I'm just like, hey, that's close, that's good enough. But I mean, I don't want my surgeon to be like, that's
good enough.
I think we got close to the right organ. Yeah, I do. So your argument though is that you've got more of a great comfort to your salvation.
Right.
You've got a great, you've got more of a argument that. And really, when I'm looking at this, whether you're dispensationalist or not, I mean, this just comes down to here was the prophecy given, and here's the days. It's just an actual, look, this is amazing. This is an amazing, miraculous prophecy. And if
But
you.
let me say something. The minute you start telling people all this, they start to get curious, and they start asking questions. And their curious Western scientific mind wants all the answers. So here's a way to give it to
Here's a way to get the answers. Yeah.
So we'll just kind of move on there. And this is going into Sir Robert Anderson's method. I don't want to bog down on this too much. I got the slides.
It's just fun to say, though, isn't it? Sir Robert.
Anderson. 1881.
He was a
the day.
knight, man.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
a big deal.
So he started in 445 BC. I told you why that was an error. He's got March 14th, but it's just it's a problem. And he ends it in the Triumphal Entry. That's where everybody else ends it now. Triumphal Entry. Was Christ killed by the Triumphal Entry?
No, he wasn't cut off. He was actually being welcomed in. It was like the highlight of the whole Holy Week.
But to make it work in this little construct, everybody who quotes this idea ends it as Triumphal
Because
Entry.
it gets it close.
It gets it close enough.
Of April 6th, 32.
Yeah.
And you're saying that's not 400, that's not 1,000.
700.
173,888. It's not.
However bad you want it to be.
And they did different things to try to get it to that date because that seemed like a good date.
Yeah. Well, they used reckoning with going back and forth through the calendars. I can show you the quote. It's really convoluted. I'm not even trying to explain it. I know there's an error there because of they go from one calendar to the next, back to the next.
Okay.
They try to
gotcha,
convert to solar years back to
okay,
lunar, and it loses days. And so it looks convenient to a lot of people, and a lot of people cited that error. And I'm like, that doesn't work, though. And I can show you using just the calendar converters that those dates don't work. And so you got to come up with another conclusion. The other problem with AD 32 is that the Nisan 14, which is the
Passover.
we
Which
know
Jesus
Christ-
is crucified on a Passover.
that's a Monday.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for anybody.
Yeah.
That doesn't
we
work.
have a church on Wednesday or something if that's what.
How do you get his body off before the Passover or before the Sabbath's done? And Sundays, we all believe that's when Christ rose.
Yeah.
So that just creates all sorts of, without going into
So
detail.
you don't have a Sunday resurrection if you have a 32 AD date.
Right, and I'm showing here,
80,
this calendar I found off the internet uses the Gregorian dates, so don't get caught up in the day of the week still is the same, Julian and Gregorian, but the like April, whatever, they're off a few days. So it's like, I'm just showing you what day of the week the Passover fell on all those dates, on all those years. So in 32 AD, it's a Monday.
So it's either going to be 36 or 33.
And the problem with 36 is pilot ain't around like he needs to be.
Okay.
And the
okay.
problem with 30's got its own problems, but it's a Wednesday. Some people want to use it.
The high Sabbath idea, whatever. Yeah. Okay.
I would just argue that the high Sabbath, it was still Sabbath Saturday. It was a high Sabbath because it was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because the Passover just happened, so it was a high Sabbath. But, 30 didn't work out with this prophecy. 30 AD does not work out with this prophecy. Only 33 AD does.
Okay.
And whew, it's
Yeah.
Friday.
Yeah.
It's a
So when
Friday.
you put the exact number of days prophesied, it winds up
happen
with
to
a
get
Passover on a Friday
in
and
a
the
year
right.
that it's on a Friday.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's just like, okay, we're on the right track. We're on the right track here. This is the program I'm using. It's small, but you can look at it. You can go to it. It's Harvard. And you can type in any date you want.
A lot of smart people at Harvard.
That's right. That's the main reason I'm using it. But
Makes it
there's
sound
all
really
sorts
smart.
of other calendars. They're all the same thing,
Yeah.
but it says Harvard at the top.
Yeah.
So it's a calendar converter, and you can do it all yourself. And I'm just showing you where to go.
Yeah.
I got the
Clear that off.
the reference as well in there somewhere. I'm gonna leave this up a second. I'm moving on. And I'm just saying they're the best methods to stick to the days that we're talking about. There's the Julian day numbers. That's why I like the Julian calendar so great. Julian day numbers. That enumerates the days that have elapsed since the arbitrary date that they used to start.
So if we say we know the end of the prophecy, well, we don't have okay. So you're still trying to say when is the very end of it,
Then I can subtract. and
right?
get
Then
you
we'll
to the
subtract and get to whenever
You're on the right track.
Then the decree was made.
right.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm just going to go at this point.
But the crucifixion is part of the cutting off, but it's not the total cutting off.
Yeah, it's
It says he'll be killed.
for him to be cut off, he's got to be crucified.
He's got to be so he's got to be killed, or at least that's what.
For him to ascend, he's got to be crucified.
But it says it's going to be killed, so that's part of the prophecy,
Yeah,
right? So the
right.
Messiah's going to be killed.
Yeah,
Okay.
but he's cut off. It's not just killed.
Right.
It includes killing, but not complete.
Okay.
If I kill you, you're cut off. But if I kill Christ, he resurrected again.
Yeah,
He's not gone yet, and he's around the earth, walking around, eating, drinking, disappearing, reappearing for 40 days.
Yeah.
So it's not until he leaves the
Not
earth that he's
fully cut.
cut off.
So the novel thing about your view is that
We've got to move
instead
the
of
cutoff
going,
date.
you've got to make the days work in the year 33. You've got to move the end of the prophecy back to something that's further back than the triumphal entry or the crucifixion, because the days don't work
Yeah,
out.
and just keep in mind, the guys that everybody's using right now have it before the cutoff. Triumphal
Yeah.
entry.
Well, it's interesting that the obvious
I
date
have it
would
at the
seem-
end of the cutoff.
If you're just going to say what does that mean, you might just think, well, it means crucifixion. But they couldn't make the math work for the crucifixion date, so they picked the triumphal entry
Right.
in the wrong year.
So Robert Anderson did it the wrong year. Harold Honer just redid his stuff with the right start point and got to the right year.
But he still didn't get to the
He
cutoff.
still put it at the triumphal entry.
He didn't get to
because
the
Robert
cutting,
Anderson did.
because he didn't get to the cutting off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't want to change too much.
Yeah.
That's the thing about Christians; they don't want to.
They don't want to change.
They don't want to change. We're worried about like messing with stuff.
Yeah.
But we got to realize I'm messing with this guy's theory,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. it's
But he's
just
on the
a-
right track.
Yeah.
So we're not really like tampering with anything
Yeah.
here. We're just trying to like show this prophecy how it is actually fulfilled. That the crucifixion was on April 3rd, Julian calendar, April 3rd of 33 AD, is held up by more than just me. I'm not the only one saying this.
So you put some.
Jack Finnegan said it in his Handbook of Biblical Chronology. There have been people showing that there's a blood moon at the day of his crucifixion, if that's when it was. It's partial, it's not complete, but it was after the sun went down, so everybody would see it. And it was about halfway. That's a lunar eclipse. Keep something else in mind. People say that, how the sun went dark on Nisan 14. You can't have a lunar eclipse and a solar eclipse on the same day. You would never have a solar eclipse in the middle of a month. And Nisan 14 is always in the middle of the month. It's
Okay.
always a full moon.
Okay, so you're saying that would show that it was a miraculous event
It's,
and not just a.
something.
like it really
something
went-
you can't say it was a solar eclipse. You cannot.
Yeah.
It would never be in the middle of a month. Nisan 14 is always in the middle of the month
Okay.
because it's 14.
Because people might just say, oh, that's not really a miracle that the sky went dark when Christ was crucified. It was just
There may be other explanations, but it's not solar
it's not a
eclipse.
solar eclipse. Yeah.
I'll just put that out there. Just so when you're telling people stuff, you don't tell them something wrong, and then the scientist in the room says, I'm throwing all Christianity out because that guy said there was a solar eclipse in the
Yeah.
middle of a month
Yeah.
on a full moon. That's not even possible. It's not. But we're not saying that's what it said. Anyway, just going over Harold Honer's method, and this is quoting from his paper when I was talking about how they kind of go through how they reach their conclusion.
back and forth.
To the Triumphal Entry. I'll leave there a second. I'm moving on. Not really going to go into that. Remember I talked about Vader, Vader, however you say it. This is the month that happens to be going on that year, and also the year. By not including that month in the calculation that he did, it got him off. That's what I think really happened. And again, that's another reference to the calendar converter. This is just showing you how the Jewish calendar works. And it mentions on there at the bottom that extra month they have to put in every 3 years or so. This is a good slide when you hear about first watch, second watch, third watch.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff packed in that slide. That's why I want to keep it up there. Fix that.
Maybe. Okay, there we go.
Now, okay, this is me just showing how if you take what Honer said, and he just do what he said, it puts and use his calculation, it puts the cutting off event 3 weeks after the crucifixion, not on it. If you do it if you do it Nisan 1, because he said Nisan 1 of 444 BC, that's what Harold Honer said. And he used the wrong he used the wrong date, Julian date.
Mm-hmm.
And if you use the actual correct one,
Okay.
it gets you to
Well, how did he get the wrong date?
that. I don't understand.
He just did something wrong.
He did something wrong.
And since nobody,
he
it's like-
doesn't. What I don't understand is he doesn't show where he came up with that in the paper.
But I mean,
looked
and
for
since most people would be like,
I was like, where did you get this date? Show me where you got it.
yeah, most people don't even know to think is the date right.
First is he picked Nisan 1 of, we're talking about 444 BC again. He picked
Yeah.
that arbitrarily. Then he said it was March something. And I'm like, where did you get the March date? He never said where he got it from.
Okay.
And there's another paper I could show that proves it couldn't have been in March. But just using the software I'm using, you don't even have to go through great links. You just use the software. It wasn't in March. It was April 2nd.
Okay.
When you use the true date for Nisan 1 of 444 BC, using the Harvard calendar converter, that's just based on science, just based on Kepler's laws of motion, you reach April 23rd if you had 173,880 days to it. And when I recognize this, I'm like, man, how do I teach this? It's maybe have doubts.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then that's what made me think, well, Triumphal Entry. Why
is he picking that one?
that date? Why are we picking Triumphal Entry? That's not even cut off. What could cut off mean?
Yeah.
So, let's show here. I'm about to get into that again to show you a better scripture on that as well. So coming down to the Ascension.
Yeah. So you're saying all the other guys, and they tried to figure out.
Were
they on? So they were on to the month in the right spot. They were on to the 173,880 days.
They got that right.
They had the
I'm
days
not
right.
deviating from all that.
You're just saying, guys, when you're trying to pick an event, and you pick, you could have picked the crucifixion, but you picked the Triumphal Entry, and I even sent you a clip of John MacArthur preaching it, saying it winds up being the Triumphal Entry. And we all trust Dr. MacArthur. I mean, he's a good
And
Bible
he trusts
teacher.
the previous guy that wrote
The
thing,
guys that are
previous
trying
guy.
to figure this out. But what you're saying is y'all have picked the wrong event in
me say
Christ's
this.
life to represent the cutting off.
Yeah, you picked the wrong event. And number two, think about medicine. This is where
Oh, there goes my drink. Okay.
this is
Saved it.
this is the
I have a video here of me drinking in
the-
the sanctuary. I should not be doing this, but okay. Go ahead. What do you say?
this is the doctor in me, right? We often look back at what we were doing 20 years ago and half of that is bogus. But we did it because the previous guy told us to do it.
Oh,
And because the previous guy told him to do that. So now we call it evidence-based medicine, where you go back and you really scrutiny evaluate, why am I saying this?
Mm-hmm.
Is there even any good reason to say it? And if not, then you go back and reevaluate. And you realize, we may not be that far off, but we're not all the way on it. There's a new study came out, said avocados are better for you, heart health. So maybe an avocado a day is better than an apple a day
Oh, yeah.
to keep the doctor away.
Well, I
But
just
anyway,
heard red meat's not bad for you.
So we're always kind of modifying,
Yeah.
but somewhat on the right track.
Yeah.
So,
Y'all know
That's all
people
I'm
are
doing.
dying, and you're trying to figure out how to stop it.
yeah, same thing here. We know this prophecy's for real. Where did it actually land? You
Yeah.
know?
I mean, it's in the ballpark to the point where you'd say there's something to this.
Yeah.
Can you get it right down to the day?
Right. So my sentence here is, I put in the paper, certainly the prophecy does include Christ's crucifixion, for it anticipates a time when the Messiah would be cut off. However, that Hebrew/Aramaic word would certainly, though it would certainly include his physical death, it doesn't have to be limited to it, because when you look at other passages for that Hebrew word, it demands
Fully removed.
that we include his resurrection and his ascension. And look at Psalm 37:9. It says, evildoers will be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord, they'll inherit the land. So evildoers are cut off from the land. Those who wait on the Lord inherit the land. So the land has something to do with it. So that Christ is not cut off from the land until 40 days after his resurrection, when he ascends. Proverbs 2:22, the wicked will be cut off from the land. So the removing from the land, think of the scapegoat. The scapegoat had to take the sin away from the camp, get physically outside the camp. So the same things here. Christ had to get physically outside to fully cut off. Now, his cutoff included his death, but he's not a normal man. He resurrected. He's cut off when he decides to leave, because he's in control. Interestingly, 10 days later, the church age starts at Pentecost.
Yeah.
So it's like, bam, you go from the hidden mystery to the church age. Well, you go from what the prophets had revealed to the mystery of the church age within 10 days of this prophecy ending.
Right.
And 10's another kind of like
You're
nice
saying
little
it's good to-
dispensational number.
It's good to get as close as you can to the church starting.
With a nice round number 10.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. It's got biblical significance. Somebody else can try to figure out if that makes any another degree of sense. But so I'm anticipating it to terminate at his ascension. I think that goes right with it. If you use the ascension as the final cutting off of Christ, you got everything you need, and the whole prophecy works out. It's just simple math now.
Okay.
So we'll start with that.
So again, you're going from, we got to figure out when was the ascension?
Right here. You're anticipating it. So Acts 1:3 indicates Christ remained on the earth a period of 40 days.
Okay.
Let me show you the scripture. The very day of his resurrection, that's when he started presenting himself alive. So that's the Sunday. So if Sunday, the 5th of April, 33 AD, is day 1, I told you there's Julian day numbers. So now we just go grab the Julian day number off. I don't have to worry about leap years. I don't have to worry about calendar conversion.
You just grab the day.
I just grab a day number off the Julian calendar.
And go backward.
And I minus 173,000. But first we know that 40 days from, because it said 40 days, right?
Right.
So if day 1 is, I got to even get this stuff right. So if day 1 is day number 1733206, look at that, 173 is even it's weird. But if day 1 is 1733206, that has nothing to do with the 173,000.
Right.
But you had 39 days because you're including day 1. That takes us to Thursday, 14 of May, 33 AD. That's Julian day number 1733245. Now, what else happened on May 14th? Do you know?
What else happened on a May 14th?
What of prophetic significance happened on May 14th? Within the past 100 years.
Within our past 100 years?
Within our past 100 years.
Did Jerusalem, was that when Israel was established?
Yeah.
What's that? No, he said when Israel was established by the United Nations.
It happens to be May 14th.
Oh, I had no idea.
It's crazy, because that's when maybe the church age is starting to fade prophetically. But I think that's a significant prophetic event. To have a rebuilt temple, you got to have a rebuilt,
You gotta have a nation
reformed
there, yeah.
nation. And so I don't think it's any surprise now that I see the ascension happening May 14th on a Thursday of 33 AD. He was crucified on a Friday, April 3rd, 33 AD. Yeah, keep that in mind. So that's our ascension date. So that's the day number we're going to subtract from.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just showing it there on the calculators I use.
Get that cleared up. So I feel useful when I do this
Yeah.
to your presentation.
If I didn't have you on what
Yeah, what would
I
you do? I don't know how you make it.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, yeah, keep on moving. So
this is the subtraction.
Here it is.
So when it comes down to it, all we did,
you just add, subtract.
all that was just working towards this subtraction problem.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So take Julian day number 1733245, subtract 173,880, and you get Julian day number 1559365. That is Thursday, April 23rd of 444 BC.
Is it in the month of Nisan? According to the
Goodness,
Julian.
it is.
It is. So it's in the month of Nisan.
It's on
according
Nisan
to
22 of 444 BC.
Okay, according to the Julian, or whatever was before the Julian
Doesn't
calendar
matter.
that they were using. It doesn't really matter
Yeah.
because it's the number of years.
Yeah.
Okay,
Number of
got it.
days.
But it still puts it in Nisan of 444 BC.
Puts it in. Yeah, it just take that number, 1559365, stick it in this calculator I'm using, and it spits you out. Every time I go back,
Yeah, it puts it in the
it
background.
spits you out April 23rd, 444 BC, and I screenshotted that. So you can do it yourself, but it'll spit you that number out. I'm like, well, okay, now I want to know when that is in Nisan. Well, we know that April 2nd, I just already showed previously. Nisan 1 was April 2nd. So Nisan 22 is April 23rd.
Okay.
So that's when Nehemiah got the decree to go and rebuild Jerusalem.
And you said that's
in the month of
and you're just
Nisan.
waiting for them to come out with this archaeological.
Dig, and this piece of thing comes up, and it's on a
that's
clay
day.
cylinder seal,
Yeah.
and it's written out, and it says the 22nd day of Nisan on it.
But if we know when it ended, we can figure out what day
Yeah.
it was given.
That's
the subtraction problem.
Yeah. And so it does work out. So I've got a little slide on that just to kind of show it to you in picture form. It all comes down to that. Just
Yeah.
memorize that slide.
So all this, just to say,
I put into one slide somehow.
I told them we were going to get into the weeds.
Yeah.
You know, we getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
Dale's
gotta-
over here. I don't know if Dale, are you tracking with us, Dale? Yeah, Dale's been kind of going back and forth between the slides and us. But you know, this is it. So,
This is a smoking gun right here.
okay. So keep going, and then we'll make the application
Yeah.
as far as how that helps the Christian in their everyday life.
Right. So just to wrap it up here, you got 69 weeks we're dealing with. 1 week is 7 years. 1 year's 360 days. Just keep the days, right? Over 69, that's 173,880 days. You take one Julian date to the next, just establish why, that's where the weeds are, to tell you why those days matter, and convert it to known scientific calculators, use those, and spit you out the number you need. And so we know it's from Ascension to decree, and that's the prophecy. That fulfills the 69 weeks. That's the coming of Messiah being cut off. Then there's a gap, and we're waiting on if the first 69 happen, the last is going to happen.
Yeah.
We don't know when. No man knows.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to try to figure that out for you. Don't try to figure out. That's the scary part of biblical prophecy. People they want it to be now. They
Yeah.
want to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, I want to see
What
it.
you're supposed to be doing tomorrow to make this thing happen is spread the gospel to the nations. That's the motive. If you care about the end times coming, you need to be spreading the
Yeah,
gospel.
the end times should motivate you. It should motivate you to care for people, because you believe that like I said in the sermon, eventually God's going to say enough is enough. Eventually there's not going to be an opportunity, and chances are in our lifetime. I'm just saying most people that have thought they've lived in the end times have not.
Yeah.
And Jesus says you're going to think it's the end. You're going to see things that are going to make you think it's the end, and the end will still not come.
Yeah.
So chances are you're going to end like everybody else has been ending lately, and you're going to die. And so we should live with a sense of urgency, at least knowing that even if you're not here for the very end, there will be an end. You're going to end, and everybody around you is going to end, and so let's live accordingly.
Yeah.
So
A sense of urgency and imminency, because you always got to think it could happen.
what
any
could
moment.
happen at any
Christ
time?
could come back for me right now.
Yeah,
And I don't want to be ashamed that it's coming.
right.
And so we got to be actively.
You shouldn't say, well, whenever it looks like he's going to come, I'm going to start being good for 3.5 years, or whatever somebody might
You
say.
can't say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You got to say he could come for me now.
yeah.
Either in death or
Well, so-
missing
and
the
that's-
rapture or trying to be part of the rapture.
That's the way that the Scripture talks about it, though. Is it comes like a thief in the night.
Yeah. There's the final timeline there.
So now we can fill in all the blanks.
All the blanks are filled in.
April 23rd is when the decree is issued in the month, and that would be Nisan of 444 BC. We have 173,880 days, 173,880 days, 233 AD, which puts Jesus crucified on a Friday,
Yeah.
We have the resurrection on Sunday, 40 days later, or 39 days later, because we're counting that day as counting that day.
Right.
It puts us at the Ascension date, which you have marked as May 14th of 33 AD.
Right.
And that's your 69 exactly to the day. One, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's almost so crazy that you
It's
don't
almost
believe
like
it.
I don't believe it, but I do. But it's there.
Because I told him today when I was preaching, I said, Chris is going to show you right down to the day.
Yeah.
That's
I
how
do
you
it?
do it. I think you did it. You know.
Yeah, but I mean, there's skeptics that are going to look at this and have some problem with it, and that's all right. But just show me where there's a problem, and we'll work through it. But right now, I think it is saying what it's saying. Even if, like you said, you put the writing of this in the 2nd century BC, it's still crazy.
Yeah. Oh,
And if
yeah.
this is true, then just stick it back in the 5th century where it belongs.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the argument I made today was even if it's 200, even if it's written 175 years before Jesus is born, to say when that thing started to when this happens, 69 years or 483 years, that is, I mean, it's so precise that you just can't miss the Messiah. You know, I mean, and I think says something really about God's word. It says something about the veracity of God's word, the reliability of God's word, how we can trust God's word. So, what would you say? I guess we don't. Did you want to go through these other ones? I guess we kind of made the point.
There's one thing I know. There's some people who believe that the 3 days and 3 nights make a Friday crucifixion hard to swallow.
And so they would want to put it on that slide with the 30, on the Thursday or the Wednesday.
Right. They want it on the Wednesdays. That means they got to put it on in 30 AD.
Oh, it's messed up.
Oh.
There we go. Got
Yeah.
it.
They want it on you'd have to have it on a Wednesday. And the only option for that is 30 AD. And that doesn't work for about a bunch of reasons.
It certainly doesn't work for the
doesn't work with this.
173,000
doesn't.
days.
So then they could start picking other dates to start it.
Yeah.
But then you start ignoring Nehemiah and the rebuilding and all.
Yeah.
So you really get yourself into muddy water. If you start to deviate from what I've shown,
Yeah.
you got a lot of questions to answer.
And you know, this is what you're about to show is not the way we think in the West. Because people are like, wait a minute, he was crucified on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but that's not 3 days and 3 nights. That's just like
How many nights is that?
2,
Yeah.
right? Friday night, Saturday night, and he raised Sunday. But we don't look at. We would say I can swallow 3 days, but where's the 3rd night? So show them how you get to the 3 days and
Okay.
3 nights. I think
One
it's
step at a time.
beneficial.
First of all, don't anachronism. That word means putting the way you think back in time.
Yeah, I call it chronological snobbery. we think because we came along later, we're smarter than people. Like when
Yeah.
people say, "Well, they just thought he had resurrected from the dead,"
Right.
and you want to be, well, you
about
don't think they knew what dead was back then? They knew what a person was dead.
Yeah.
People have always known that
Yeah.
since
They're not dumb.
Cain killed
They're not
Abel.
idiots.
Yeah, they knew when you die, you don't get back
They're
up.
probably smarter than you.
Yeah, they figured out how
they
to
had
make.
to learn.
They figured out how to make bread.
Yeah. Do I know how to make
I
bread?
mean, how would you look at a field of wheat and be like, tell you what, I think we can bake that. Y'all want a hamburger bun tonight for supper? How would you even think, let's roll this and let's throw this up in the air and,
Yeah.
and then knead, like, I don't even know how you do it.
I don't know.
But they figured it out because
Yeah.
they were really smart.
Right.
So yeah, so don't, we should not get it, we should approach
But
this
they
past
thought
with
things,
humility.
they had a little different way of thinking. So
Yeah.
my wife comes from Afghanistan. And she thinks more like an ancient person because it just comes out of that culture.
Yeah.
And they like
I hope she's not watching that.
a day, 3 days. You know, they're very inclusive.
Right.
They're not exact like a Westerner. So they can use things idiomatically, and it conveys certain meaning
Right.
that we look at it more literally hardcore.
We're saying it's got to be 72 hours or it's not.
For
it
just as
doesn't.
Jonah was in the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. People cite that. I'm saying take it idiomatically, not hyperliterally. Take it like the Jews did it in their day.
Right.
They were very inclusive. I just showed you them including like being inclusive of a whole year being part of the year.
Yeah, and the
They call it
Ascension,
whole
the
year.
Ascension Year idea.
Yeah, right. Accession year.
Accession Year.
Not
So
to
the Accession Year, they
confuse.
would call it a year, but it really was like 6 months
Yeah,
or
right.
3 months or
So
something.
I used an inclusive mentality anyway. So first of all, think like a Jewish person back then. Their days were not midnight to midnight. That is a weird way to do it, honestly.
Yeah, because we're
We
not
do.
even awake when the
Yeah.
day starts.
Yeah. We wake up and we're 6 hours into the next day. Or whatever. And so they were like, no, it's when you wake up. That's when the day is.
Okay.
And so they say, well, basically, the new day starts. They actually start the new day. The sun's going down.
Mm-hmm.
So they like that nighttime feel, but they started the new day at 6 p.m. So not when you wake up, when the sun's going down.
Okay, yeah.
All right, so think about Jesus having his Passover meal. If you think of it, I always, as a kid, I was like, why is he having a Passover meal and it's not Passover? Because Passover was the next day. Because we always said Christ was crucified
Because
on
the sun
Friday.
had gone down. Is that why?
Well, yeah, and to them it was Passover day.
'Cause it was
Their
already
day
the day,
starts at
because their
6
day
p.m.
started at
So they're
6
having their
p.m.
Passover meal that night.
Yeah.
It is Nisan 14.
Yeah. So we might say the day should start when we get up, but they would say the day ends.
But the problem is our day's already going when we got up. They say let's just make it when the sun goes down. That's the next day.
That's the next day. So the day, let's say the day ended.
Yeah.
That's what makes
Yeah, there you
sense.
go.
The day ended when the sun went down.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying
And
to
that's
say.
the beginning of the next day.
That's right.
Yeah, okay. Just had to work. You weren't thinking like a Jew, probably.
I was probably I'm trying.
Yeah, try. I can't do it.
And not just
My day begins when my alarm clock goes
sometimes
off.
people try to think like Jews of today, but Jews of today are Western thinkers.
Yeah.
Think like an ancient man.
Yeah.
from at
He
least
would
the
say,
two-
I
2000
can't
years.
see anymore. The day just ended.
Yeah.
You know, I was putting up Christmas lights and I kept thinking, we're about to run out of day. I mean, I was thinking
Yeah.
that in my mind.
Right.
And for them,
Daylight.
literally, whenever the daylight went down, when the sun went down, the
Let's just
daylight
call
went-
that the day
the day
ended the
just
day.
ended.
Yeah.
And the next day has started.
Yeah.
And that's why they, like a Seventh-day Adventist will think of that. They'll kind of shut things down at sundown on Friday.
Yeah.
They still kind of keep that idea.
Because
So
they're very legalistic and go to law. And they're
sure,
trying
going back to
follow
the
that.
law and trying to follow the law.
Yeah. And so Thursday night is Passover night. And the Passover daytime is the next day. So, well, Jesus has his Passover there, okay? He's crucified the next morning, and he's taken off the cross before the sun goes down. So, in a Jewish mind, he's like, okay, night one is Nisan 14, night one,
Yeah.
which is Thursday
Night one is Thursday night, even though he
'Cause
wasn't
the
in
night of Nisan 14 is
counts.
not the next night that we think of. It's the nighttime of Nisan.
Yeah.
The nighttime of Nisan
So
14
if
started
you
Thursday
said
night.
3 days and 3 nights, then they're just thinking that since he was on the cross that day, it included the night before.
Yeah,
Because that was part of the day.
yeah. That was part of the 24-hour period.
You have to
they called
rewind that and get that, but I think I've figured that
it. You
out.
pretty much got it. So you include that previous nighttime. That's night one of the day he was crucified.
Yeah.
That counts.
3 days and 3 nights is because we just think forward. The nights come after the day.
Yeah. They
We
think the nights
think
come
day
before
and
the-
night. They think night and day.
Just like the 20th year of Artaxerxes.
Yeah.
The preceding Kislev is still within.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
That's how you got to think of it. So we're getting there. All right, so then Friday is day one. We got night one, we got day one. Friday night's night two. Saturday is day two. He was Saturday night now is night three. He's got Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night.
Yeah. it's
Friday day, Saturday day, Sunday day,
Yeah.
because it's the next morning he's resurrected.
Yeah. So you need 6 half days, 6 periods.
You need to
where
be
you
in the
count.
daylight and in
Yeah.
the nighttime,
Yeah.
and you are on that Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You are.
And then in that case, that's your 3 days
That's
and
your
3
3
nights.
days and 3 nights. And ancient Jewish reckoning is that.
And so you're saying that's why we get a 33 AD, is because that's when you have a Friday crucifixion and the Sunday resurrection.
Yeah,
And
you
then it
have to
will-
have that. There's other scriptures that says they got to get his body off before the Sabbath, and it says the next day he's rising. It's
Yeah.
it's referencing that Sabbath, and it's saying the next day he's rising. So he's got to have crucified then on a Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people who want it on Wednesday try to say
They wouldn't have to have the body off. You wouldn't have had to have the body off if you were.
Well, they will say, okay, they got to get his body off before Wednesday night because the next day is a high holy day.
But it was just a festival.
It was a festival.
You're talking.
They want to call it a high Sabbath.
You're saying this is in 30 AD.
Yeah, they would call that Thursday a high Sabbath.
Yeah.
But that's not the way the term's used anyway. It's a high Sabbath because John calls it a high Sabbath because it's a Sabbath that happens to have the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Right.
Because the day after Passover is the Feast of
Yeah,
Unleavened Bread.
I've heard that argument. I've heard people say that argument. Well, trying to figure out because they're not happy with the way this works here, because they want the 3 days and 3 nights to mean what it means to them,
Yeah.
not what it would have meant to the people in the first century.
Yeah.
So that's where you can kind of get into a mess.
Yeah.
So to recap, let me try to recap and you correct my recap, okay?
Yeah.
Because you've done a lot of talking and I know you're probably tired.
No, I'm not.
Okay,
I'm fine.
so
I could go forever.
well, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So just to recap, we're saying that, like I said this morning in my sermon, when you have doubts, when you have questions, is this real? How do we know that God is telling me the truth? We can take this prophecy that we've gone through here, break it down into days, find the start date, find the end days, see the prophecy is completely reliable. And God says in Isaiah chapter 41, the argument that the prophet makes or God makes through the prophet is that the true God can tell the future. And here's a case where the Bible tells exactly the future, and it's not like a deal like Harold Camping or these guys where they're saying, okay, the world's going to end this day or the world's going to end this day. It's actually, and we would say, well, yeah, if it really ended that day, we would believe him. But it never ends that day.
Right.
But this is one where you can look back and say, okay, exactly what he said would happen, it did happen. And you could say the other thing, if you look at the other prophetic chapters in Daniel, where he's saying this empire is going to come, then this empire is going to come, then this empire is going to come, then it all happens. I mean,
Right.
Daniel's reliable prophecy. It's so reliable that people are like, there's no way he could have
So we're
written
going to
that.
go and push it to 200 BC.
Yeah.
And they have to do that because they got pieces of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls from 200 BC.
And so they can't make it
They
later
can't
than
make it
that, or
later.
they would.
They want it written now tomorrow because this thing works.
because it works out exactly. So when you have doubts, you can rely on God's word to tell you the truth. So any parting words or thoughts, or as we kind of conclude that? I appreciate you coming out here and doing
yeah.
this afternoon.
I think we've hit all the important bases here, and I just think
How long did it take us, Dale? What did we go?
probably an hour and a half. Oh, it says 136 up there.
136, yeah. So I know that takes a long time. No one would sit through a sermon that long. I don't know how Dale did
Yeah,
it.
there's no way to put it, a pastor, just to set people's expectations of a pastor whenever they're teaching biblical prophecy or anything that
Yeah,
has
it's
a level
hard.
of study. There's the scripture separates preaching and teaching. So teaching is this, what we just did.
Yeah,
And preaching is just hitting the high points, the overall message, to try to get the gospel out
yeah.
and get some kind of response.
And
That's what
people-
you should expect out of a
And
pastor.
people really want you to get into this stuff
Yeah.
that they find really fascinating, and you just think, there's no way to do that with the tasks that I've been given in a kind of a chunk that. So this video here, people can watch it 30 minutes at a time. When you're preaching, at some point the diuretics kick in, and people have to go to the bathroom, and it's just a matter.
They're going to check out.
They're going
not
to check out mentally,
And then
so
when
on
they come
so-
back in, they're going to miss like 20 minutes and like, what?
But this, I really wanted, when Chris and I were talking about doing this, I thought this would be a really great, and we really appreciate Dale sitting up here this whole time and helping us. Dale's the technical wizard on this. But I hope this is helpful because we've been able to put the slides on the YouTube video, and I've tried to ask the questions like, the everyman who doesn't know
Yeah,
what's going
it's
on
great. It worked out
to
great.
try to figure out what exactly you're saying, because you're saying something really important here. But again, it's like when you get technical on people, their eyes glaze over. But this is a passage where you can really be encouraged. And so I hope that you are encouraged. I hope that if you have questions, write them in the comment box. And Chris can answer those, and we'll try to do our best. And so we thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Dale, for helping us out.
Spread this if you got other people who might want to watch it. I want to get this idea kind of out.
Yeah, Chris has kind of come up
Spread
with this idea, and it's kind of sad that not very many from academia or whoever has interacted with him.
Yeah.
So just to scrutinize it and see what holes they can poke in it. But I think you've done a
Go for
good
it.
job defending your position and showing us all the ways that you arrived at it. So appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Thank you, my friend.
No problem.
All right, we're signing off. Thank you, Dale.
That was awesome.